Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle!
The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón! All creatures great and small!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Come seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart podcast network. It is Thursday night, and I'm joined by Niko Moreno. We are doing a special episode of what we learned this week because there was some big news today, and tomorrow's Halloween, and we didn't really feel like recording on Halloween. Niko, how are you doing?
Hey, what's going on, Jeremiah, Sounder at Heart family? Yes, you're absolutely right, man. I mean, both you and I, we're dads, and, we're probably going to be busy tomorrow trying to get everybody squared away. So, I thought that it was a good day to record, specifically because, we learned a lot this week in a bigger, more in-depth and I don't even know how to describe it, but we just learned a lot that we need to digest, that we need to kind of talk through, and I feel like you're the right guy for the job, because if there's anyone that knows and understands what we learned this week, it's you're gonna be able to explain it.
Well, I appreciate that. But so let's stop beating around the bush. Essentially what happened today is the Sounder, first of all, a story came out in Sportico, which is a sports journalism or a sports business like magazine website. And right as we were finishing up our scrum with Brian Schmetzer, news drops that the Sounders are looking for investors, and they're essentially trying to do a capital raise with the idea of basically to help build a stadium, but they also have all these other big projects. They want to inject some more money into the operation, essentially. And unfortunately, this came out. We weren't able to ask. I guess Brian was ready to answer questions about it, but we didn't know about it until after that, or I should say, it wasn't public until after that. You had gotten some word that something like this might be in the offing, and we actually thought we might have some time to look into it.
Both you and I really did. That was, it's how things happen. But when I told you what I had heard and, through sources, what was kind of coming down the pipe, you very intelligently predicted that someone was likely already working on it, or they were going to beat us in, what'd you call it? The type of media or the type of
they're a sports business outlet. They're like a sports. They cover the business of sport. And to give you a little sort of like inside baseball on how stories like this happen is, I don't know exactly how they got word of it, but there are quotes from the Sounders in the story. They had clearly talked to the Sounders about this. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Sounders basically, wanted it out there that, hey, if you want to invest in the Sounders, now is the time. And Sportico is the kind of outlet that gets these types of stories. And sure enough, that's what happened. To cut it into layman's terms, essentially what's going on is, like I said, the Sounders want to inject some money into the team. Now, the release, the way that's been phrased in both the release and in the story, is that the current owners are not divesting themselves. They are not getting out of the Sounders ownership business. At least that's where we're the starting point. The starting point is that essentially what they're doing is they're creating what do they call it? Diluting their shares. So let's just say the Sounders are made up of 100 shares. And for the sake of argument, we don't know this, but let's say for the sake of argument, Adrian Hanauer has 50 shares. And, the Allen estate has 25 shares and Drew Carey has 12 shares and everyone else has the rest of them, right? Well, what they're doing essentially is creating a whole new group of shares. Let's say they're creating, we don't know the percentages, but we're just using round numbers here. Let's just say the Sounders are creating 50 more shares. So everyone has a slightly smaller percentage of ownership than they used to before. But the difference between this is that if you are selling your shares, you're essentially getting out of the business. And that money that you're selling doesn't necessarily get reinvested back into the Sounders. But what they're doing is they're creating a whole new, essentially a whole new class of ownership shares, and with the idea that this money will be reinvested back into the Sounders. So it's kind of an interesting little quirk, but it's not that, again, it's not that anyone is trying to get out of the business, at least not on its face. They just want to raise some money, which is, I guess, kind of interesting because it points to, potentially some more money for them to do some exciting stuff.
And I appreciate the way you broke that down, because initially when I heard about this, and even prior to the Sportico article, my thought process immediately went into maybe, Adrian Hanauer, who both you and I think, have been very public about how much he cares about this club and about how much he's put into it. But, being able to talk to him, know him over the years, really puts a human element to all of the effort that he's put in. But as the league grows and the league continues to demand so much from owners, I don't know, it was my opinion that, when I talked to him, he kind of felt like, it was tough for him, right? I mean, I think we all know that him, compared to the rest of the owners in MLS, he's not at the high end of the richest or the ones with the most profit. So
right,
when this all started kind of coming down and we started hearing things, maybe I thought that he was looking into just kind of moving on and allowing somebody else to take over. But the way that we're phrasing now, it does kind of make me feel like he's going to continue to be a part of the equation, a big part of it, and a majority owner. And I guess that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you like the direction the Sounders are going, at least in the way that this is phrased, so far, it looks like it's going to be going in the same direction. But here's the thing, and this is the catch. This is what's not talked about in the release. This is not what is in even the Sportico article, is that, they're looking for a significant amount of money. They're not looking for 10 million. They're not looking for 20 million. They're looking for hundreds of millions of dollars, presumably, because that's the kind of investment they're looking to bring in. This is a group that just spent a bunch of money to build the Longacres training facility. That cost about 75 million, something like that. Well, if they are going to build a stadium, or they're going to set themselves up for building a stadium, they're going to have to raise, hundreds of millions of dollars. My guess is that, the starting point for a new stadium is going to be something like $500 million. It could very easily stretch into the $1 billion range. And that's understanding that this is not going to be a 50,000 seat stadium. I mean, that's just what, these stadiums cost these days. It's not cheap to build. It's even in Renton, it's not cheap to build a football stadium or soccer stadiums. And so anyway, if you're talking about the kind of investor who's going to come in and spend hundreds of millions of dollars, in my assumption, the Sounders' most recent valuation in Sportico was something like $825 million, which is, that's a fair chunk of change, right? They might get valued, the Austin FC just got a valuation of $922 million. Columbus Crew just got a valuation of $900 million. I'm sure the Sounders are in the same range. They might be in the 860 to 900. They might be $1 billion team right now. In any case, I assume they're trying to raise hundreds of billions of dollars. And when you're talking about the kind of people who can afford to buy into the percent, buy in at that level, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they look at this whole project and they go, okay, it would be interesting to put in $200-300 million, but I'd rather just put in $500 million and frankly own control of the Sounders. And that's where this could get really interesting.
And I think that's where the story turns. And obviously we are kind of at the start of the domino line, and at some point the domino line kind of curves out and we can't really see beyond that. And I'm obviously using this from someone else, but this is where we are. And I believe that what you just said, the stadium component, it is a big deal, because this is something you and I have discussed, away from the mics, is that if I'm putting down this much money, this much investment into a stadium, that I want to be able to have a lot more operating power and things, and that comes with more stakes. And therefore, it's clearly something that can just fluctuate as time goes on. And whether it's for better or for worse, I mean, it's at the very least very interesting that all these things are playing out, especially now. The fact that we're talking about this right now, right before the World Cup, it's very interesting.
Well, it's also interesting that this came out in the middle of the Sounders' first round series, which makes me think that there's something that to me feels like forced the hand of this coming out now. And maybe it's just that this is when it's get the most attention. Maybe it's something else, but it's definitely interesting that this story is coming out, like I said, right in the middle of games 1 and 2 of a first round series. Now, I don't necessarily think the Sounders players are going to be too distracted by this. The reality is that nothing is really changing for them on a day-to-day certainly on a day-to-day basis. Nothing even in the short term is really changing. And again, since the club is not literally for sale, they're just sort of looking for investors. There's a chance that nothing is even, no one's, they're not looking they're not sizing up the drapes, or as they say. I think that's a saying. But it is feel a little weird that it's coming out right now. I think really though, what this is tied to is the timing of the league is getting ready to announce most likely a new format for themselves. Don Garber has talked a lot about how they want to go to a spring to, what do they call it? Spring to fall, I think is what they call it. Spring to fall to spring. That's what it is. Fall to spring schedule. An international, like on the international calendar.
Right. Anyway. They want to kind of get with the rest of the world, basically.
Right. Exactly. And so I don't know. It's going to be very interesting around here. The way I read it right now, I don't think Adrian Hanauer is getting out of the Sounders business. My suspicion is that even if he were to no longer be the majority owner, I strongly suspect he's still going to be involved in the club. But I think what this is really, it's an acknowledgement that the league has moved beyond what the current Sounders ownership can afford to maintain. And yes, they've been competitive. And I mean, heck, they could go and there's a totally realistic possibility that they could win MLS Cup this year. But I think they can also see on the horizon where there's this group of owners who just wants to get rid of a lot of the rules that have kept MLS so competitive. And once MLS becomes sort of a much more free spending league, the Sounders are going to be in a bit of trouble because they just don't have the operating capital that an Arthur Blank does, that the Moss brothers have, that, the Haslams have, that, you can kind of, that City Football Group has. You just go down the list And the more the guardrails come off, the worse the Sounders' position is, unless they have, a whale who's willing to write a few more checks.
And that's why my initial just takes on this whole thing that I put on social media were that because of when this announcement and press release essentially at one point has come out, I really do think that it creates a magnifying glass to just show you that this is a big deal. I mean, it feels to me like at the very least, even by diluting the shares and maybe slicing that piece of pie in thinner slices.
Right. That's a good analogy.
It feels to me that at the very least, Adrian's looking for someone that carries a similar amount of shares that Joe Roth did, or that,
right,
that could give him that much of a partnership to rely on. And that's just the way I see it. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably right. Is like, I think because right now Adrian Hanauer is, by I think a pretty healthy margin, the biggest shareholder of the Sounders. I don't know if he's actually over 50% or not, but he's certainly at least in the 40% range, or he's over 40%. And then I think the next biggest owner is the Allen estate, but the Allen estate really doesn't do anything with their money. I mean, it's kind of my understanding is they didn't really put anything in to buy the club at the start, and their whole investment was basically agreeing to run the business operations and sort of provide support for the first 5 years of the club. And then ever since then, they have really not had what would be a traditional, part owner relationship. They have really been the Sounders' boss, not the boss, but they've been their landlord as the people who operate Lumen Field. And they haven't, as far as I know, they've never really been asked to write checks, aside from, they had some checks that they had to write for, Clint Dempsey signing, and whenever they have there's a budget every year where the various ownership entities have to put in some money, but they aren't really being asked to do much. And that's sort of the other interesting shoe that I suppose could drop at any moment. As people know, most likely if they're Seattle sports fans, is the Allen estate has 25% of the Sounders, but they're in the process of divesting themselves from a lot of these sports properties. They just sold the Portland Trailblazers at, I think, a $4 billion valuation. They obviously own the Seahawks, and Jody Allen apparently is trying to hold on to the Seahawks, even though the terms of the estate are that she needs to sell them after a certain amount of time. But you got to think the Sounders are a pretty tempting piece, because that 25% is probably worth something like $200 million right now. And so it's not hard for me at all to imagine this new owner coming in, buying whatever new shares are out there, and then piling on and buying that 25%. And you would think, I can't imagine that Adrian Hanauer wants to put himself in a position where he's sort of forced out of the majority ownership. But you could see a situation where he sort of cedes it, especially if he thinks that this other person is going to be able to write much bigger checks than he's been writing lately.
And you bring up a good point, because this business opportunity, and as they put it, they're looking for investors. It's a very attractive brand to go to, right? I mean, we look at what San Jose and Vancouver, those are other teams that are up there publicly for sale, essentially, or if anybody wants to jump on board. And the Sounders are just a more, not even just put together, but just heavily rooted, globally known, successful, especially franchise. And if I'm a guy that is trying to make an investment, that's where I want to put my money on. I want to go to a team that has what this year they had an up on attendance. Even they went from third to second, right? If I'm not mistaken, Jeremiah.
Yes, that's correct.
So all of those things just seem like a sustainable way for me to understand where my investment is going, and that I'm putting it on a pretty solid baseline, right? And that's what somebody would want. So for me, the real question is who comes in. The values in which the Sounders have been ran over the last couple of decades, do those align? I've heard a lot of comments and honestly panic from people about, and maybe fairly so, about what this team would look like in 10 years. To me, the best scenario is that Adrian Hanauer continues to have that vision and those values with a partner that has deeper pockets and therefore you can get more things done. You can be more ambitious. You could bring in more players. And another thing that I think is important to clarify is that the rain is not involved in this. This is only Sounders. This whole move and this look for investors is only going to be on the Sounders side. So I feel like that's important to clarify as well.
Yeah, that is important to clarify. And I think it sort of illustrates a little bit of what is going on. It also sort of underscores what's going on here, which is, at least on its face, again, this is not a bunch of owners saying, like, we want to get out of this business. We want to sell while the selling's good. This is them saying, look, we really like what's going on here. We just want someone else with money we want to inject some money into the operation so that we can sort of like get this thing going. And, I don't know. And I think one of the other things that's going to be interesting is that when this new money comes in, how focused are they on this new Longacre Stadium plan that has sort of been swimming out in the ether for the last couple of years? And ever since I first went on the record with Hugh Weber about this stadium idea, I've been watching it very closely, and they've mentioned it kind of in passing various times. I believe at the annual business meeting it usually comes up, and a few other times it's come up. But what's really interesting is that there's not really a lot of information out there. We still don't know exactly where the stadium would go, other than sort of vaguely near where the training facility is. And if you look at Longacres, the current configuration of Longacres, it's hard to imagine where a stadium would actually fit on the current footprint. But put that aside, there's been no renderings released. There's not really been a plan on how people are going to get in and out of this thing. I would think, the lease at Lumen Field runs out in 2032, which in some ways seems like a long way off. But if you're trying to build a stadium, don't you kind of, if they were really dead set on doing this, I feel like there would have to be a lot more hype and energy going into this. And instead, what we are left with is a constant drumbeat of fans every single time this gets mentioned, of saying, man, if they move out to Longacres, I'm never going to another game.
It is understandable. Look, I would love it, right? I mean, selfishly, it's closer to my house. It's closer to everything that I have. I mean, my daughter practices, 5 minutes away from that location. But the reality is that the Sounders are too big for that sort of location. I mean, you're talking about Renton Tequila. I mean, those are things that you don't want next to your soccer team. I mean, you really don't. You don't want to be, right next to, a Dutch Brothers and, near the mall. I mean, it's just nothing about that is just interesting, trendy. And not to mention the fact that you'd have to add so many roads, so many things. So for me, what this opportunity could essentially have, going to your point, is that if it's an owner and let's just put a name to it, like Cuban, or
Sure.
you know what, Noah had a good one that he said there was a sight of Adrian Hanauer and Steve Ballmer at a Mariners game.
I actually, I have a little anecdote to add to that, but go ahead. But let's
So
say
if it's
Steve Ballmer,
Ballmer, and
right.
he could, put a stadium on Elliott Bay or something that just is outrageous that no one has even thought about because he has the pockets to do it, man, that puts you in a phenomenal situation, and this is not a knock or anything on Adrian. It's just the reality of the world. And I've always told people this. I would always fight, especially on the Latin and Hispanic market, where I would get into these radio shows and they'd be like, oh, Adrian doesn't care about the team and, he's a cheap, SOB and all of these things. I'm like, look, man, he cares about the team, but I care about my house, but I don't got a pool and I don't have a theater room because I can't afford it. So,
right.
Him in the same way, he cares about this team, but at the same time, look, you might think he's rich, but I don't got his, book of economics in front of me, but I can tell you that if he could, he probably would give a little more. So this to me just gives him the partner that maybe makes his dreams come true.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes No Sarietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible through our paid subscribers. Plans start as low as $30 a year and allow us to remain independent and mostly ad-free. Subscribers get access to all our written and podcast content, including a full-text RSS feed and a mostly ad-free podcast feed that includes every show in one spot. If you really like what we're doing, though, I'd encourage you to sign up at our higher tiers, which include all sorts of various perks. The most popular of those is our members-only Discord, where the real Sounders sickos hang out. I know I've called this group the smartest, funniest, and best-informed Sounders fans in the world, but it's more than the rough equivalent of a Sounders Mensa meeting. Discord is where we make things happen, like for real. You know the promotion the Sounders ran that offered fans the opportunity to trade in their Messi jersey for a Paul Rothrock one? That originated in our community. You'll not only be the first to know about stuff, but you also have a semi-direct line to the movers and shakers at the Sounders organization. If you want to be one of the totally normal people who occupy the Sounder at Heart Discord, just become a supporter of Sounder at Heart. Anyway, thanks for listening and go Durs. No Sarietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Hacks and Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Hacks and Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at hacksandferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code SOUNDERATHEART, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to hacksandferments.com, use the code SOUNDERATHEART at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Hacks and Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network. Right. And I think that's to me what this looks like. Is it looks to me like I will say that, so this is all stemming from, there was supposedly a picture of Steve Ballmer at the Mariners game sitting next to Adrian Hanauer, and I actually looked into this, and I have been told that it is not Steve Ballmer, that it's just some executive from Costco. So that doesn't mean that Steve Ballmer wouldn't be interested in buying the Sounders. It just means
that is hilarious.
It just means that wasn't him in that picture. But either way, a guy like a Steve Ballmer, a guy like a Mark Cuban, or God forbid, like a Jeff Bezos or something, like these are not, I'm not sitting here, I'm not like
John Texter.
Right, exactly. I'm not sitting here vouching for any of these people. I'm just saying this is the kind of person who is possibly, who this, I would imagine the Sounders are hoping to attract. And those kinds of people don't necessarily want to be there and be silent investors, especially in high profile sports teams like this. So who knows where this goes? I think that's sort of what we just needed to get on the record, though, is make sure people understand where we are now but where this might go, because that's the thing. We just don't know where this is going to go. It's possible that someone says that comes in here and they just want to put up a couple $100 million or whatever, and they are just happy to help the Sounders kick the can down and put a down payment on a new stadium or something. I just don't really think that's what's going to happen. I have a feeling this is going to grow into something bigger.
Yes, I'm totally with you. There are too many variables that essentially lead to Adrian Hanauer at some point becoming a minority owner, or just somebody
Right.
that's within, the operation of the team, but it's really not his team anymore. And it's more of whoever is this new investor. And that's just the reality. When we look at all the things that this fan base wants, something as simple as having a real hard cemented situation and platform for the Ring of Honor, for the Sounders to be part
Right.
of Lumen Field. All of that kind of goes in line with a new ownership could provide maybe a little bit more push on things. It
Right.
could just create so many more opportunities for what the team wants and needs to an extent. But I will say that I was surprised about how very little some players knew. I mean, for the main part, it just seems like not a lot of players really knew about what was going on.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so it's I guess it's just the way it goes, right? You're just kind of
Right.
you're too
You're just
close to
checking
it.
in at work.
I mean, your checks are gonna still
Punching the
come.
clock.
Yeah, exactly. As long as my checks don't stop coming, I guess it's nothing crazy.
Right. Yeah. Well, all right. So that was the main thing we just wanted to get on the record. There were a couple other things. It's a little. We've only been to training one day, and so in terms of what we actually learned about what could change between now and Monday, it's a little less clear. But one thing, we did talk to Brian Schmetzer today. He talked about probably three things I would say are of various levels important. One of them was the goalkeeper situation, and specifically what he might do if they go to another shootout. He talked about playing Danny Masovsky and Jordan Morris together. And he also talked a bit about the Ryan Kent. And the Ryan Kent one is relatively simple. We'll get that out of the way first. Ryan Kent, he said, is going to be available. Apparently, he felt a little bit of discomfort last week. And so in the last minute, they decided it just wasn't worth the risk. They fully expect him to be, he was fully training today, and they fully expect him to be available on Monday. The more interesting discussion, though, was around the goalkeeper, and specifically whether or not Brian is open-minded to the possibility of subbing in Andrew Thomas before penalties. You asked him about that. What was your takeaway from his answer?
That he has no interest whatsoever to make room to save a sub, to make sure that he has a window to sub in Andrew Thomas. I mean, that plain and simple. Both you and I asked it in different ways. And both times he just did not seem to budge or want to make a change. And I feel like, although it should not be necessary, I do want to clarify, because I did hear some comments on both of our questions. In no way or form am I, or I think Jeremiah, saying that we want Andrew Thomas to take over for Stephen Fry completely right now. We feel like that, or I feel like that discussion, I don't want to talk for you, Jeremiah. That discussion is over and done with. The competition is over. Steph is the guy, and that's fine. I think that's great. I was part of that, part of the argument. I was Team Steph, if you will. But that does not mean that Nico Moreno believes that if there's a way to get Andrew Thomas into a game when you're going into PKs, that it would substantially increase the Sounders' chances at winning that penalty shootout. And it's not disrespect to call a spade and just point out certain things that Steph is a phenomenal goalkeeper. There's a lot of things that I like about him, but penalty kicks have never been his strong, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying that's not your strong. And I kind of see Brian, especially today, reference a 2016 stop. 2016. It's almost been 10 years, right?
Yeah, I did
and
think
then
that was a little funny.
And then adding, he said Steph stopped 2 just last year, but 1, got waved off. So he didn't, right? I mean, if he got waved off, he didn't, right? So, and I know why he's doing it, right? He's protecting his guy, and I love that, right? He's making sure that he sticks by his guy. But at the same time, I feel like Steph is such a intelligent, self-aware, self-assured individual that I don't know if you would have a problem with stepping aside at the end of a game and allowing Thomas to come into the field and win the game, because Steph's always been a team first guy. So I would love to ask him, and I will whenever I get a chance to ask Steph himself. But to me, it just seems like he would be okay with it.
Yeah. I will say I thought that Brian left the door open slightly. Like he did it, and it wasn't like the way that he was talking about the competition, where he was literally calling it an open competition, but he seemed to give himself a little bit of an out. Now, if tomorrow's game or Monday's game goes to a penalty shootout, my expectation is that Steph's going to be the goalkeeper. And I guess that, and then I guess if he wins it, then he would be the next time. So yeah, I think you're right. That's where I am right now, is I am not expecting him to make that change. And I did think it was important though to clarify, like my question, I don't know if people took umbrage with my question, and it wasn't to poke Brian or whatever else. I just felt like it was important for him to go on the record and say why he doesn't like the idea of making that change, because the numbers are pretty clear at this point. Andrew Thomas is really good on penalties, and Stephen Fry is not. That's just like the numbers are really, like I talked about the actual data on the last episode of No Sadieta, so I don't need to get into that all again. But just take my word for it. The numbers are pretty clear as to who is better equipped. And so I just felt like it was important for Brian to explain why he doesn't want to make that change. And essentially what he said is, I just don't like the idea of bringing in a cold goalkeeper and essentially telling my starting goalkeeper that I don't trust him to make these plays. And that's fair enough. It's a little bit more of an old school approach. And he also brought up how, he brought Danny Leyva into the game explicitly to take a penalty. And by the way, Julian Gressel got brought into the game explicitly to take a penalty. Both of those guys missed their shots. That sort of speaks, I think, a little bit to Brian's point, which is it's tough to come into a game and be asked to perform in a high leverage moment like that. And, I guess on some level, I believe I think he really believes that for sure. Whether or not I totally agree is separate, but I respect his decision at the very least.
Exactly. And I think that's the important part. Although I do not agree, I do respect the decision, and I respect that he gave us a straight answer about it. But I do feel like he, to me at least, I don't think he left room to say that he might even do it. The fact that he talked about we need more data on whether or not Andrew Thomas is good at PKs was wild to me. That just told me I'm not doing it. That's what I heard. I'm not doing it. I don't care what your numbers say. And look, I'm not a numbers guy. I've always been an eye test guy, and I go off of a lifetime of following the game. And look, I've been privileged to see some of the greatest penalty kick stoppers of, I guess, South American. I don't want to call it all time because people are going to kill me, because there's going to be like some English goalkeeper that I have no idea about. But in my time, I've just seen some goalkeepers that they lived on stopping penalty kicks, and it takes a different guy. It's just a different mentality. And you saw it with St. Clair, the mind games, moving the ball and barking here, barking there, pointing over here, getting into the mindset. Not to mention the fact that he has the frame for it. And it's not all of it, but a lot of times that athleticism, that explosiveness, it does give you a little bit more of a response time on when you're trying to stop a shot. So there are things that you could very easily say, as much as we love Steph, if he wasn't very effective at stopping them, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, now is even more difficult for him to do it. So that's why I think that the whole argument about bringing in a goalkeeper and bringing in a penalty kick shooter is completely different. I mean, to me, and look, he's the coach, he's the mastermind. I'm just a guy talking here, but to me, it's apples and oranges. What he takes for a player to get himself up to score that shot is a lot more different than it is for a goalkeeper. The pressure, and look, I've talked to a lot of people about this subject. The pressure is always on the shooter. The goalkeeper knows that nobody's expecting him to make that stop.
Right.
The pressure is 100% on the shooter. And therefore, the amount of like warm up and things is not as severe as the one that you need for a goalkeeper. Not to mention the fact that goalkeepers across history have come in late in the game and they have been effective.
Yeah, it's not unheard of at all. It's not a common tactic, I would say, but it's not necessarily, like I said, it's a thing that coaches do. It's not something that Brian seems interested in doing, and I guess that kind of puts it to bed for now. The other thing that he talked about was playing Danny Musovski and Jordan Morris together, and I thought he was pretty non-committal about that. He did recognize that they had two really good chances with them on the field together, but he also thought that they created some good chances before that. So I don't know. I don't know that I didn't take away, because the other thing that's tough is that if you want to put Jordan Morris and Danny Musovski on the field together, that means you're taking off, you're taking off Paul Rothrock or you're taking off a winger is what you're doing. You're probably taking off Jesus or Paul Rothrock, which I don't know. You might take off one of them anyway, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sitting here expecting them to play Morris and Musovski at the start. Now, might he be a little sooner to go to his bench than he was in game one? Yeah, I think that's more possible.
I would agree with that. I believe that there is a little bit of an overreaction on the two opportunities that Danny Musovski got in that game, and playing Jordan as a winger and all of these things. I believe that the better chances, at least in the buildup of the play, were created when Jordan was in there. I mean, I'm probably sounding dumb because obviously there were half chances, right? But it was simply because Paul Rothrock, the one he had, he should put that on frame. He had time actually, and he could.
There are better
put that
movements.
On frame. And
better movements before. I would agree with you there.
And the reason why I bring that one specifically is because I believe that the intricate passing, what Brian called today combination plays, they are just as important to break down a 5-man back line as speed on the wings and stretching out defenses. Because once one of those center backs pushes up, and you have a player that's dribbling towards, and you create some of that intricate passing, you could literally pass your way centrally through that barrier and get a good shot on goal. Now, Seattle didn't do enough of that, but I do feel like Jesus Ferreira, who, if you see the start of that game, had within 11 minutes or 10 minutes, two very good through balls into the 18 for Jordan Morris. So I think that there's a lot more of that to be had, but I understand. You're right. I mean, Musovski when you look at the stat sheet and you're like, he needs to be in there. He's a poacher. You need to, and I get some of the concepts, right? He's a guy that's going to be occupying certain spaces that maybe gives Jordan the ability to do other things, and he's going to wear and tear those center backs. But I feel like there's this notion that Danny Musovski is this very physical striker, and I don't think that's the case. I don't see it in practice. I feel like I
agree with you. There's this belief that he's like this classic number 9, and no, he is a poacher. There's nothing wrong. Like
he's a poacher. No,
he's a poacher. That's what he is. I mean, and in fact, every time, other than the 2 plays where he admittedly got himself into great positions to score, he did a lot of stuff that is like illustrative of why he's not the starter. Like he just dribbles into blind alleys, and he will, make kind of dumb unnecessary fouls, and he'll give the ball away unnecessarily. And look, I'm not saying he's a bad player, but he's a much more limited player who's very good at specific things, and those specific things are really useful. But let's cool it with, he's not a better soccer player. That's the thing. Jordan Morris is a better soccer player.
I just sometimes I feel like, am I seeing the game wrong? Like, am I crazy? Because sometimes I hear people talking about Musovski like it's Lewandowski or Haaland. I mean, I don't know. I mean, just I don't know. And again, I don't want to be this Danny Musovski hater. I've said it. I think it's important to have that poacher. I give him credit for everything he's done. But if I'm going out on the playoffs, I want the best I have on the field, and the best I have in talent and potential and ceiling. And Danny's not in that equation, regardless of the amount of goals that he's got this season. I don't care if it was 20 goals. He's a limited player. And you see, there's that one time in the game where he like dribbles around, and then he like basically runs into Paul Rothrock in the same space, and they like look at each other like, what are you doing here? And it's just, he just looks so odd.
I think that's the exact play that I was thinking of.
It's just, there's no cohesion sometimes with the way he handles certain moments. So I don't know. To me, I understand it. I just don't want to see it right off the start, like some people do. If there's any changes that I would do is perhaps, and this is just perhaps, because I feel like Rothrock is getting a lot of heat for not having a good game, and I don't think he had a good game. But defensively, he did a lot
he did
of wear and tear. But if you want to start Georgie in this one, and you want to try to wear down that side, and maybe have a guy that with his 1v1 and the ability to maybe stretch out that defense and to create some of those Pedro de la Vega moments where he's igniting the whole team with his play, and the crowd is cheering, and he's the injection of like energy. I'm okay with it right off the start, because if you can score early on Minnesota, I mean, that's the tactic to get them to just have to get out a little bit. And maybe not with this format, to be quite frank. I mean, there's a chance that, even if they went down a goal, you're still going to just play the way they play. But that's the one change. If you want to put Georgie in to start instead of Paul, I'm okay with it. But other than that, nothing. The other thing I would say is that I would like everybody to lower their Ryan Kent expectations.
Yeah.
I have seen him in training. I know that they want to have him there, but the fact that he felt something and was unable to play last week, and the fact that today he was on and off and not completely involved, I just think that we just have to be very mindful that our theory that Ryan Kent is more of a break the glass emergency player if we need him, that's more likely that's the role he's gonna have in this series.
Right. Yeah. I'm not, I think at best he's a player who's going to come off the bench and play a few minutes, and we'll see what he can get. And maybe if the Sounders advance, they might be able to get a bit more out of him, but I'm not expecting a lot. Well, we should probably get out of here. It's a little late. I got to get my kids to bed. But Niko, thanks for jumping on here and breaking it down with me. Hopefully people feel a little better about, or at least feel like they're a little more knowledgeable about what's going on with the ownership situation. Again, like the big takeaway here is stay tuned is really it's like this is just the first shoe, and it's hard to say what's going on. But for now, it looks like maybe not tectonic, but whatever. There's going to be some more money getting injected into the Sounders either way. That much we know. So,
but it feels like a big deal. It feels like a big deal.
No, I would agree. This is the first time
way they phrased it, the way they've approached it. So you out there, audience, if you have questions, if you want to know more about it, I mean, we're kind of new to what we're learning too. So if you have any questions, comments, let us know, and we'll probably be talking about this a lot.
Yes,
from here on out.
I would imagine that's true. Absolutely. All right, Niko. Obviously, follow Niko over on Blue Sky, El Rolo NW. Follow him on Pulso Sports at YouTube. Soccer Down Here, Lobbing Scorchers. You know all the places. Niko, thank you for doing this, man.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate you.
All right, you're listening to Sounder at Heart, you're listening to Nos Audiences, which is part of the Sounder at Heart podcast network. I'm Jeremiah Shan, and we will catch you next time.
Let's go Sounders.